an issue that every school, regardless of circumstance, has been battling for years now, cell phones and how you deal with the distraction. And joining us now to talk about this with some really compelling research is Abid, who is the founder and CEO of iCode. And Abid, appreciate you taking the time with us. Some of the research you have on this is pretty remarkable. First, in general, do you think that cell phones in the classroom are more of a problem than they are helpful?
Hey, good morning, Brian. Thanks for having me. And I personally think, Brian, that cell phones have no place in the schools. There's enough research done on this topic. Just like with anything else, Brian, there's pluses and minuses to anything that you decide. But in this case, absolutely, I think cell phones have no room in the schools.
Now, it's interesting because obviously you're involved in technology, and it's interesting for someone with your background and expertise to say, yeah, but this technology in the classroom is not helpful. Do you feel that technology like, say, tablets, for example, for educational purposes, that's different than the cell phones?
Absolutely, because, in a tablet, I think it's a lot more conducive to learning than a cell phone, even though cell phone, as you know, pretty much acts like a computer. But I think the other things that kids can do with a cell phone, I think, makes a difference. So I think tablets is definitely, something that could be used in the schools.
Now, some of the more compelling research you presented with me is actually what's going on overseas. For example, Sweden, all of Sweden has an outright ban on mobile phones. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about how that's played out there and the impact that we might learn from.
If you look at most of Europe, not only Sweden, France, as well as Denmark, England is also considering banning phones. And they've done enough research to indicate that, this is not necessarily a good thing. For instance, even in South Korea, they demonstrated that the kids who have used the cell phones have a higher rate of, higher level of neurotransmitter which slows down the neurons, resulting in a reduced level of control and attention. So I think there's enough research to indicate, and as we all know, the school system in Sweden, England, Denmark is much better. The students that are coming out of those schools are much more educated, much more knowledgeable than the kids graduating here in America. So if they're sort of looking at the research and coming to the conclusion that the cell phones are not a good thing, I think we ought to, take their lead.
We are speaking with Abid, who is the founder and CEO of iCode, with the research and information that cell phones in the classroom are a bad idea. What's interesting is, as we have more research showing that it is inhibiting education in the classroom, more and more schools across the country continue to allow the use of cell phones. What is that from your perspective? Is it just the education establishment capitulating to the fact that most kids do have these and they just don't want to fight it?
I think so. And also I think there's parents, and about 48% of the parents would like to have kids have cell phones in the schools. And I think it is the issue of having a policy across the schools that could be implemented. There are a lot of schools that have policy of not having kids have cell phone, but even with that, 65% of the teenagers have cell phones, even though it's banned at the schools. So about 35% of the schools admit that they're using the cell phones to cheat. So I think, in terms of, the pressure from the parents, I think is causing the schools to be a little bit more careful. Obviously, the shooting in the schools have also made the parents a little more sort of apprehensive about not able to access or have access to the kids when they need them.
Abid, you had something in your notes here, your research, that ended up making me think of texting while driving. I remember seeing a piece of research on texting while driving, I want to say about a year and a half ago, that surprised me because I will not text while I drive, but I am guilty of getting to a stoplight if I received a text and then taking a look at it and maybe texting something back myself while I'm stopped at a light. Now, the research on texting while driving shows that even that can be an issue on the roads because it takes your brain time to recalibrate and focus on what you're doing once you switch gears. That ties into what you're talking about here.
Absolutely, and I think parents, we are the worst because we are also addicted to phones, whether we're stopped at a stoplight or sitting at home in a family living room, you're on your phone. And I think, cell phones are addictive. I mean, they have been proven to be addictive. The smartphones apps and messages, they release dopamine in the brain, which leads to addiction. So they are as addictive as nicotine, alcohol, and other drugs. And one thing that I found quite interesting, Brian, when I was doing the research, was that the mobile developers who designed the games, they actually designed the game to maximize addiction and to gain a dependency.
Wow.
So cell phones is no different to any other drugs out there, and I think that makes it even more compelling that we as parents first set a right example for the kids, and as well as for the kids to not have access to phone as much as they do.
That's really interesting information that you just laid out there. I've not heard it communicated the way that you just did, that ultimately you've got like the video game developers and other folks that are involved in various forms of technology that know how to get a chemical reaction out of your brain. And so they will program things to get that chemical reaction, which keeps you coming back for more.
Absolutely. And I think, cell phones have a place. I mean, it's not that it's all negative, just like with anything else in life. Nothing is 100% wrong, even marijuana, for instance. There are benefits to it, but doesn't mean necessarily use it or abuse it from that perspective. So I think, cell phones have a use. For instance, I mean, I have 3 daughters myself, Brian, and at home in the evening I see them collaborate with their friends for homework assignment. They're doing Facebook to kind of work collaboratively on a problem or on a project together. So I think, cell phones have a use. All I'm saying is, in the schools, they have no room, because I think it leads to, addiction. It leads to kids not paying attention. Increasingly, kids getting a shorter span of attention and also I think cell phones leads to depression because, kids are worried about, how many likes do they have, right?
Right.
And that causes stress and anxiety among teens. Cyberbullying, I mean, is a huge issue that we are facing as a nation. I think the Snapchat, in terms of inappropriate photographs. So I think there is enough negative things that the kids can do with the phones in the schools compared to, I think, at home, they could be used for the right reason to do homework, to do projects, and collaborate with their friends.
You make a very compelling case, and you have really good research at your fingertips that you shared with us. It's appreciated. Abid from iCode, thank you very much on considering banning cell phones in the classroom. You mentioned that 40% of parents want them, and that is part of the problem. And a lot of that, where I've seen that type of research, the parents are worried about security, right? And that's understandable because, well, if you want your kids to have the ability to reach out to do something if they are confronted with adversity at school, you're not going to want them to have to check in their cell phone when they get into the classroom or just not be able to take it, right? So that is a balancing act. But what's interesting, and I cited the research on distracted driving, that was a wake-up call to me, and it makes sense. So in the distracted driving research, it showed that if you're stopped, like at a light, and you read something, maybe you send a text, on average, it takes your brain about 18 seconds to completely refocus from what you were doing to what you're now doing. And it makes sense if you think about it, right? When you are communicating with somebody and you immediately hit the gas pedal, are you still at least somewhat thinking about what you just said? Or are you 100% focused on hitting the gas and driving? You're distracted a little bit, right? It makes perfect sense. You can always try it yourself sometime if you have any doubt about whether it is so. So then think about it in the classroom. That same thing is the case. You have a kid who takes a look at their phone, okay? Well, then it takes them another 18 seconds to focus on whatever the teacher's talking about. And then by the time they're locked in on that, how much have they missed? And then are they looking at their phone again? Wash and repeat. It's a process that never ends. That's where this research is coming from. Pretty interesting stuff. All right, coming up, we are going to have Natalie with your top trending stories right here on the Brian Mudd Show, News Radio 610 WIOD.